Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. This video is going to cover the finished cliff project, aka the Beast. And of course, because there is so much to cover, it will be broken up into a few segments like I did on the last work in progress update. But before we get to it, I just wanted to put out a thank you to all the customers who've been patiently waiting for me to get to their projects. The cliff project took a much larger amount of time than I expected, and at this point I'm willing to formally declare I have no sense of how long anything I work on will take. So I want to thank them for being patient, and I also wanted to thank the customer for this project because this customer has been so flexible, so encouraging, and really, with a project of this size, and this kind of a customer, I think it's almost wrong to call him a customer, and really, maybe he should be referred to as a patron of the arts. This is more and more becoming an art form, I think, in the similar way that miniatures painting has become an art form over the past several years, at least formally recognized as such. And I think with a project like this, it really showcases the kind of support that's out there for terrain. So I just wanted to extend a very big thank you to the customer for giving me the opportunity to be able to work on something like this. I also wanted to put out an apology to the other people in my world who wonder where the heck I've been, because I've been devoted to this project for so long. I think a few people out there are wondering if I've fallen off the planet. So now that it's over, things will start to get back to a little bit more normal schedule. So thank you to their patience as well. And I should extend a thank you to George, my cat. If you haven't seen previous videos, George has been my loyal companion throughout this adventure. And at the end of the evening, after working a long day and feeling like I just need to crash on the couch and watch a movie, he's been very good about sitting next to me and giving me a little extra support. So thanks to George. So the first section, we'll get back to the video here. The first section is going to be on the structures on the project, and we'll talk a little bit about how those were all finished. The second part of this, which will be a second video, will be on the landscaping and the various features. So if you see some of the landscaping features in this video, don't put questions yet in the comment section. Wait until the last next video, and then finally we'll go over the electronics. I'll show you some of the final adjustments that I've done, and we can talk about those in that video. So, get ready for a trip. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to try and be brief. And, of course, hopefully along the way, I'll answer some of the questions that you're bound to come up with as you start to watch the video. So, let's head over to the cliff and we'll start talking about the structures. So, first we'll take a look at the bunker side of the piece. And I wanted to give you a full, view of it before we come in close up on it. To give you a sense of how it looks now all integrated. I have the ladders now attached. The ladders are removable. The camo netting has been added. The camo netting was a suggestion by one of the viewers in a previous video. Customers saw the video comments and said, "That's a great idea, go with that." So he wanted to thank whoever had made that suggestion. So I've added the camo netting. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. And then I've gone in and painted the bunkers with a sort of concrete gray color. And actually there's a bit more detail in the concrete that's been actually covered up a little bit by the netting, but I wanted to finish them, as I normally would, even if it wasn't there, so any of those subtle, colors might come through. So before we actually come in close on the netting itself, I thought I would show you some of the research that I did for the netting, and then when we come up close I can talk to you a little bit more about why I went with the look that I went with. So let's take a look at the computer and I'll show you what I mean. So before I show you some of the other reference pictures, I wanted to take a look at the netting that was suggested by the customer. In hindsight, I may have gone with this, actually, if I'd thought about it a little bit more, but I got persnickety about doing my own. A couple things about this netting that sort of didn't quite please me was the pattern that they had laid down over the netting. It didn't look entirely realistic, and the netting itself had a pattern that didn't look quite historically right, where these are sort of oval here. And I thought I could do something a little bit better. I figured if I ended up purchasing these, then I would have to repaint them myself anyway to match the Cliff Project stone walls. So I decided to keep looking around for some other netting, and I saw this, and this started to give me an idea. And actually, there's a video that shows soldiers in World War II making this kind of netting and threading all of these strips of cloth throughout the net. And so that was kind of what I started to try to recreate. Then I also was taking a look at the buildings, and they had hooks that would retain the camo netting. So I thought that was something that I'd want to incorporate. Here you can see another picture of another style of camo netting. And I think in retrospect, the effect that the Build-A-Rama that I showed you at first has is not too far off of this. So not too sure about that. Let's see here if I had any more reference pics. Here's another close-up of the actual material that was done with the netting. And I actually tried to do this. I actually cut thin strips of tissue paper and tried to weave it into all of these spots. That was a no-go quickly. And here's another shot of some of those hooks. And then I also found a guide online that showed some of the colors that were used, as well as some of the different styles of cloth that they wove into it. In the end, again, as I said, I could not get this effect to look right. It ended up just looking like paper on the net, and so I abandoned that effect. So let's take a look at the net that I did do, and I'll explain more about why I chose it. So here you can take a look at one of the bunkers a little bit closer, and we'll come up a little even closer than this in a minute. But what I ended up going with was a oh my goodness, a cheesecloth camo net. And what I did then is went in and overpainted it with some greens that would match this. One of the things that I had a lot of trouble with was getting a color for the net that would sort of tie into the rocky surface, as this surface has, quite a bit of color variation in it. I ended up going with a plain netting rather than the weave look, as I just couldn't find any way to get the weaves to sit right and look realistic. I tried for a couple hours, I couldn't do it, and then looking, I saw Pegasus Hobbies, for instance, sells, and we'll do a review of Pegasus Hobbies camo netting in a future video, but that they were using plain, netting, excuse me. And so that was what I ended up deciding would go with it. I double layered it so it'd be a little thicker. And then you can see I installed hooks all around it. And I left these hooks just a little bit proud from the surface, thinking that the netting, could be removed and reinstalled. But once I started to put it on, I realized that it's far too fragile for, putting on, taking off, putting on, taking off, because these little fibers are going to tear. Plus, I wanted it to have a much more natural hang. I wanted it to capture that feel of cloth, and so in order to have it hang down rather than have it, fluff out like this, or have, areas up here that aren't sitting like they have weight to them, I realized that I would need to install it permanently and then wet this down and put in like a matte medium into the water to help seal it so that it retains this shape over time and sits, I think, a lot more naturally. So that gives you an overall look of it, as long with the ladder, and we should come up for a real close look, and I can show you a few more details about the bunker as well. So here we can see a close-up of the camo netting and the bunker, and a little bit of the ladder as well here. And this gives you a sense of how the material is starting to, it deforms as you play with it, which is kind of nice because I think it adds a little bit of realism to the texture, but it's something that's going to really come apart over time if you keep trying to pull it off of these hooks all the time. Now the hooks are just a little bit loose in some spots. So I might put a little drop of super glue in there to seal these up, but I didn't want to finish them before I had played with the camo netting, just to make sure that I knew whether I needed to crimp them more to take them on and off, and obviously I've decided to leave it as it is. And you can see here, this has also allowed me to drape it over the edges of the walls, which I think gives it a little bit more realistic feel without permanently installing it. It kind of fluffs up a little bit and doesn't sit like it's a heavier cloth. And it allows me to put in a few folds here and there just to sort of tie it in a little bit together. And I put this piece along the bottom here to give it, a front sort of slightly camouflage look, but obviously you can't, hide the interior of this. I did think about having the netting come down quite far, but in the end, I still wanted to preserve easy access to get miniatures into the interior. And I think if I had permanently installed it and added, stiffening, I added a little matte medium to this. I don't know if I mentioned that already. Then, how would you get miniatures in and out? So I decided to leave it as a wide opening here. And if you, I'm going to try and focus in really close on the door in here so we can see that. And we'll be limited by the camera's focal length. I don't plan on getting the macro lens out at the moment. So here I'm going to have to bring in a light manually to highlight the back of this bunker. But you can see here that I've put in a door and I've done a little shading in the back of the bunker, not too much, a little shading on the walls. You can see that in the corner there. And this also gives you a little bit of an idea of the texture. You can see that concrete texture in the roof section. So what I did for the concrete is I mixed in a little bit of foam coat into the first layer of paint, and that actually gave it a really nice sort of grittiness that I think is actually really well in scale for miniatures of this size. So remember, if you haven't been following this video series, this is intended for 54 millimeter up to 60 millimeter scale miniatures. So for the door, what I did is I built it, put in the hinges, put in the door handle, and I put in a firing port because I know sometimes they would have an area to fire through if people were on the other side of the door that they needed to prevent from entering. The problem with that is that they don't actually look like this. I thought it would be nice to give it, let's see if I can point here. I thought it would be nice to give it a stepped-in pattern. Oh, actually, I forgot. I need to black in that last spot. There's always one more thing. Anyway, pretend that's blacked in right there. I'll touch that up after the videos are done. But they don't actually have this kind of a pattern. You might have it on the back side or something, but usually it's just a little slot. But I wanted to add some detail to the door. I had a lot of trouble cutting these out by hand. I'm looking into a die cutter for future kinds of projects like this, so I can cut that by hand. And then what I did is I added rivets all the way around the sides. The rivets, I used the nutter to cut the rivets. This is a tool designed exclusively for rivet and bolt head cuttings. I will be doing a review of that in the future. But I thought the rivets came out really well. The door handle sits, you can see it shadowed there, sits out. I built the handle on a couple posts so it doesn't actually sit flush with the door. And then I went in and I just did a little quick chipping work, not very much. I figured this hasn't gotten that much wear, but a little bit around the handles, just a hair around some of the hinges, and a couple spots on all of the doors. And of course this gives you a nice close-up of the camo netting, that you might see, if you were here in person and you took a really good close look at it. And if I pan, hopefully we'll stay in focus, you can see the rope ladder and the hooks that it's hanging on, and then you can see some of that knotting that I did. As I mentioned before, this is the actual knot that people use for rope ladders, and so each one is hand tied, so it all has the flexibility. And in fact, I thought you could even roll it up for scenarios, and then part of the scenario is deploying the rope ladder to access the lower areas. So I thought that might be kind of a nice little feature. So this gives you a good close-up look of the bunker, shows you some of the details that I've added, some of the features I've tried to incorporate, and we can take a look at the other side now. So before we come in close again, I just wanted to give you a look at the overall fantasy side now that it is complete. The only thing I'm not showing you, and we'll do that in the electronics video, is the lighting for the waterfall. We'll save that as a special enticement to get you that video. But what you'll notice is that I've done a sort of a maybe an unusual paint scheme for it. One of the things that was a real challenge for me visually was this walkway in terms of how to paint it so that it doesn't look plain, but also, you know, looks interesting without adding in extra pieces onto it. Originally, I'd thought about a pattern on the top of the walkway. I had thought about some build-outs along the side. One of the problems with adding, you know, actual elements to it is that these slots here are really hard to work around, and I realized that these two lines here are actually not parallel. I didn't think about that when I cut it. I just thought it looked good, and in hindsight, I think keeping those parallel would have made a little bit more sense for future work. In any case, so what I did is I finished these in a green granite, and we're going to go talk about why I chose this in just a second. I finished the other stone surfaces. I embellished them to make them look a little bit like basalt. I'll show you that in a second as well. And then I did a Verdigris pattern on the door, and that's something we're going to talk about as well. So before we come in and take a real close look at this, again, I just wanted to give you a quick overview, and now we'll hop over to the computer and I'll show you some of the thinking that I did and the resources that I used. So here you can see a page that I found that is a fantastic resource for some painting ideas. This is the address here, so if you want you can copy that down. And there are a lot of other tips and tricks in this page, in this site I should say, that are well worth checking out. So if you're interested in any of these kinds of ideas, take a visit here and see what they have to offer. One of the things that I started to look at were the various options: black marble, white marble, red, all of these. And I thought it might be nice to do it in black marble. This was something I originally was starting to consider, but I thought that black marble might be a little bit too fancy to match with the basalt, the gray areas. To really get the marble look, you're going to want to apply a gloss varnish to it to make it sort of pop. And I was a little concerned about doing all of this vein work amongst all the pieces, as the pieces are quite large, so there's a lot of areas I'd have to do for this. And I thought it might actually overshadow the other areas that I had already painted. So I decided to abandon the marble, and I started taking a look at some of the other options that were here, and I came across this green granite. And this green granite I thought would be a very nice complement. It's done through several layers of stippling. He uses a scouring pad for this, and then you finally get to this sort of effect here. And I really, really liked that, and I thought it was something that'd be achievable in all the pieces, even with all these steps, and I thought it was something that wouldn't blow out the other areas. So having decided on that, I needed to find some green granite to use as an idea, as I wasn't exactly sure how the colors were going to look, you know, what colors to choose, I should say. So I went online and found several pictures of actual granite. These have been sliced for granite countertops. And you can see that there's actually a really wide variation in the colors and even the patterns of green granite. So I felt like I had the flexibility to go with whatever color that I wanted, as long as it adhered something to this kind of a scheme. And this is pretty much the color that I ended up trying to model the pieces on. So looking for these dark flecks, quite a bit of these white flecks coming through, and then getting in this sort of tan teal green as you know, sort of the cohesive color that ties it all together. Then I decided to look at the other pages on here, on the other tutorial on here regarding Verdigris. And I mentioned that I had done Verdigris in the outside door, and so I decided to take a look at these stages, and these you can see you know, the way he's applied layered washes to the pieces to get a sort of more of a Verdigris look. I actually opted for a slightly different technique, and I'll show you why in a minute. But I wanted to, once I had looked at this, I wanted to find some real pictures of verdigris to make sure that the color scheme that I'd be aiming for is going to be realistic. So here you can see some pictures of verdigris that I found online. And one of the things, when I was originally applying some finish to the piece, my wife came in and said, "It's not that blue." And then when I started looking at real pictures, you can really see just how blue it is. A couple things that I was interested in, however, is how the verdigris fills a vertical piece. I was wondering if you get less of it in the higher areas and more of it in the lower. And there is that effect very, very subtly throughout this piece, but you can see that that's not really a driving force in how it lays itself down. I should say how it oxidizes, where you can still have high areas that have quite a bit, some prominent areas maybe where it receives wear, but you can see also in some of these areas up high that there's still some of the metal showing, but is in the bottom as well. And there are some slight color variations. I don't even know if this is an actual verdigris, or I can't remember. I found a lot of pictures where verdigris had been artificially applied to metal statues, so I was really just trying to find things that had a much more natural look. You can see that here. This I thought was a very interesting picture in that it shows all of the various layers of verdigris that can occur and how those colors shift, where you get these very dark blues moving out to an almost white color at the very edges. And I'm going to show you exactly how I started working on this and why this effect is actually fairly realistic. So let's go back to the piece and take a look. So then I was thinking about the interior walkway and the doors and how I would paint them. And it occurred to me that I might try to look for some natural rocks that would be relatively easy to pattern but would give it a little bit more of a jazz. So I was looking at basalt formations, and I noticed that this would be something that would be relatively achievable, where I have this very even color, which is basically the color that I started with. And then it has a regular pattern of little white flecks within it. There's obviously quite a different number of forms of basalt. I thought this was absolutely stunning. This might be something I try to incorporate in a piece in the future. But looking at really the close-up slabs, you can see that white pattern with some darker shading. But here is a clean, planed piece of basalt for construction, so you get a wonderful cross section of it, and you can see these darker patches, these lighter patches interwoven, and then a very even spread of these rather uniform white particles, white mineral deposits in the basalt. So this is the look that I was going for on the piece in terms of its walkways and the doors, and we'll take a closer look at that and see how that came out. So before we take a look at the granite that I did actually in more detail, I wanted to show you the palettes that I practiced to get a feel for exactly what kind of color scheme I wanted to go with. I went with a very dark color scheme, which I thought might be a little bit too strong to contrast with the gray of the basalt. I went with a much lighter one, but these sort of very bright greens didn't look quite right color-wise, and the overall feel didn't quite look right. And then I did one that's a little bit sort of in between. My wife actually liked this the most. And so what I decided to do was try to hit something not quite like any of these, but something of a blend of all three. So in doing that, I ended up with this color scheme. Let's see if we can keep those in with it a little bit. And so you can see then that what I ended up doing was, obviously a little brighter than this, a little darker than this, and bringing in some of that much more speckled pattern from here. Now, one of the interesting things about trying to achieve this effect is that the recommended technique, right, is to use a scouring pad to sponge stipple onto this to get an uneven particle size and distribution. That works fine for these test palettes, but as soon as I moved to this piece, I realized that that was not going to be an option, mainly because of the kinds of areas that I'd be trying to stipple around. Obviously, trying to use a sponge and stipple into these areas is going to be relatively impossible. in addition, trying to stipple in amongst this kind of contour actually was becoming really impossible. I did try a little bit, and I actually tried it a little bit more on the Archer emplacements here. Whoop, there we go. And it was literally impossible to get that color into all of these small recesses in any way that didn't blow out the top surfaces. So what I had to do is go in with a very small brush and hand stipple all of these surfaces, and that meant I had to be extra careful about creating a randomized, pattern, keeping the particle sizes small, and doing that with at least 3 layers, I believe, to achieve that. Some things like the major doorway, that was not easy to do, but I think the end finish on it looked really, really nice. And again, I wanted something that wouldn't blow out the actual stone, that color that I had originally put in, which is that light gray. So going with something much darker than this, I think would have been too strong. So that is the decision that I went with on that, and gives you a sense when I pull back about how those pieces tie into the rocks. And my envisioning of this was really thinking that maybe people had been mining green granite in the depths of the earth and then had brought those pieces up to adorn this, as obviously, that doesn't really reflect the stones that are around it, but people import or excavate, stones to bring them in all the time. So then that leads to the basalt choice, and you can see what I've done here is, here's a little pan back look at it, obviously, but I wanted that speckled pattern to come through with those dark and lighter grays kind of intermixed in a more even way. Now, again, I did not sponge this, excuse me. Or actually, I'm sorry, I did sponge this, but I had to do some touch-ups with a brush around some of the corners because they're so tight. And of course, I didn't want to get too much onto the granite, although it's a forgiving texture to get material onto because of its irregular coloring. So if we come in on that, whoops, wrong direction, just a little bit closer here, you can see then that what I tried to do was get that very, very light white speckling on this. That was not as easy as you might think, and in fact, I think it came out really, really well. And I did that on all of the doors as well, so that the entire piece would have those 2 stone color schemes working together. And I also did it on the deckway that I had finished before, and so that actually kind of tied it all together. But that meant that I would have to tie this floor into the rest of the interior passageway, which is its own difficulty. So let me see if I can come in a little closer on this, and I'll show you what I did. So if my camera will stay in focus, this gives you an idea of what I attempted to do. So basically, I carried this pattern into the passageway, and every area that's visible of the passageway except this break to the left here, because the stone actually changes there. I did a pattern as close as I could to the outside. This was a trick. Let's just put it that way. I had my arm in here up to my elbow with the second hand holding a light, trying to shine it in so I could see what I'm doing, had the lights in the interior going, and trying to make that pattern look reasonably decent. Not easy, but this is a fairly artificial look, and it does get better, the pattern, as it moves out towards the edge, because obviously it's less tricky to work on. But when the interior passageway is actually lit by the normal lights, which we'll see in the electronics section video, then this pattern actually doesn't even look very strong in the back. It's almost quite hard to see, and so it really actually worked out quite well. I was really pleased with that in the end. So that was a crazy addition for me to try at the sort of towards the end of this project, but I think it was a worthy effort. So I want to just give you a little bit more of an in-focus look, a little bit closer of the passageway so you could see that. And you'll also see a transition line between, the interior and the exterior. And this is when I weathered the door, thinking that, water running off would stain the stone. And that actually created a little bit of a division line, which actually kind of worked out nice because there was a small line of these two separate pieces of foam there, and that kind of masks it. So anyway, that gives you a sense of what the interior passageway looked like and how I tried to match it to the exterior. So here we can see the pattern that I put on the outside door and the verdigris effect that I went with. Now, this was a bit of a conundrum to me, as I did not want to do it in a bronze color that matches the symbols that are on the interior of the walls of the passageway. And I thought that it would wear and, get this oxidation, if I can say that, on the outside wall. And I wanted something that would work well with these, as there's no other metal showing on the exterior. And I thought if it was something really, really bright, it would look out of place. Maybe not, I don't know. But I wanted to do something a little fancier with it. So the first attempts that I did, actually I did 3 attempts, was to use sophisticated finishes. And I'm going to put up an example here of what sophisticated finishes looks like. I did a sophisticated finishes review quite a while back, but a very brief explanation of it, and if you're interested you could go back and take a look at my review, is that sophisticated finishes is an actual metal paint. It has metal within it, and this color is almost exactly, well, this is oxidized now, but the original color is almost an exact match to the interior bronze. And then you apply a liquid to it that causes it to oxidize, and then you end up with, and this section here is a good example, you end up with a literal, actual verdigris on the surface. Now, the problem that I had with this is that this piece is quite large, and the verdigris effect that you get varies depending on how much of the oxidizing liquid you apply, how dry and thick the layers of paint are, and to get these to match in any way, shape, or form to look like they're the same age was actually impossible. I tried painting it, and then first I did the whole thing, washed it with the oxidizer, and you could see where I started painting was not as affected as the areas where I finished. Then I decided to do it as halves, so I did a half, weathered it, half, weathered it, they didn't match. Then I tried to follow each, so I do like 1, 2, 3, wash those, 1, 2, 3, wash those, and I could not get it to match. But I was very disappointed, I should say, because areas that did finish right actually looked really, really good. So what I ended up doing then was using the sophisticated finishes color scheme as a guide. And you can see here me testing some colors next to it as I was mixing them. But I was trying to find, this blue-green, this sort of white, offish white color, and make sure that those are exactly the colors that I put into it. Now this is a very, very blue with just a hint of teal in it in terms of how to mix up that color. And then I had this lighter color here to use as my contrast for my second highlight color here. This actually was this color, diluted a little bit more, and then cut with some white weathering powder so it would give it a real chalky effect. And that, I thought, would represent the verdigris the best because it is an oxidized layer, and usually those are crumbling, if you will. So let me see if I can do a much better close-up of this, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So here you can get a sense of what that color scheme looks like up close. One of the nice things about this original carving, is that the carving actually had a lot of ridges in it that were part of the hot wire cutting of the area out. Plus, it was really deep. So this allowed me to continuously repaint this until I got it right without fear of filling in any of this texture. The final effect, then you can see, has that deep blue. I realized I didn't have to have it sitting too low, so I left it where it is. And then that whiter sort of oxidized look on it as well. So while this, I think, looks a bit different than the effect that many miniature modelers do for their verdigris, based on it compared to the sophisticated finishes, which is actual verdigris, I thought it was a good match, and so that is how I finished it. So I wanted to give you one last look at the pieces from a slightly different angle before we leave this piece. So you can get a sense of how the fantasy pieces came out. One thing I didn't mention is that I did go in and hit all of these carvings with a little strike of a highlight, which I think helped to give them a little bit more depth. And you can get a sense of how those two match up over on the side there. And that gives you a little bit of a look at all of the fantasy elements. One thing, I didn't show you. Oh dear, there's just too much. There's just too much. But I did paint the piece in here as well in the same matching with its own little iconography. And then, of course, what I did is I blackened all of these areas because I was thinking of the heat of the waterfall. So those are all blackened suitably to match that, which I think came out well. And of course, you can see some of that, gradual shading that I did down here, just to try to give it a little sense of weight there to it. And in any case, that's a look at the fantasy structures. So that gives you a look at the fantasy structures and how I finished them, and hopefully you found it informative or at least entertaining to see some of the resources that I pulled from to come up with ideas for finishing it. This is a much longer video. There's a lot to talk about. I probably could have rambled on for another 10 minutes. I'm going to try to edit this down. We'll see how successful I was. But of course, there will be another 2 videos at least for this, talking about how I did the vegetation and the foliage and why, as well as the electronics and how they were revised and finished up. So hopefully you'll come back and join me again for those videos. And if you have any questions or comments related to the structures, feel free to leave them down below. If you saw something else in the video you were curious about, hold those questions until I do that section of the video. Hopefully I'll get these out pretty close to each other, but this one's going to take a bit to edit. There's a lot to go through. So if it's a day or so between them, hopefully you'll understand. In any case, keep an eye on the channel for more videos, and I will be back again soon. Okay, we're going to do it again. Follow the menu. That's what the fucking menu is for, Mike. Any day you want to get that right, you feel free. You feel free. Because, I don't mind editing for 16 hours. Bunker side, take 3. That'll be an outtake.